Behind every locked door lies a story the world was never meant to hear. Welcome to Behind Bars TV, where we uncover the hidden realities of the world's toughest prisons, untold inmate experiences, and the systems built to contain them. From supermax facilities to forgotten penitentiaries, we revealed the truth behind concrete walls and razor wire. This is not fiction. This is the world behind bars. Most brutal Folsom Prison, California, institutional control, state power. Before supermax prisons. Before solitary confinement became policy. Before the United States mastered incarceration. There was Folsom State Prison, a prison built not to correct behavior, but to break it. Here, punishment was never hidden. Pain was never accidental. And control was the entire philosophy. This is the prison that taught America how to dominate human beings. With stone walls, iron doors, and absolute authority. This is not just a prison story. This is the origin story of institutional control. And once you understand Folsom, you understand the modern American prison system. Stay with us. Because Folsom never forgot what it was built to do. A prison carved from stone and fear. Folsom State Prison opened in 1880. California was young. Law was harsh. And mercy was not part of the blueprint. Unlike modern prisons built from steel and concrete, Folsom was carved from solid granite, quarried by the inmates themselves. Men didn't just serve sentences here. They built their own cage. Every stone wall was laid by convicted hands. Every corridor shaped by forced labor. Every cell a reminder that resistance was pointless. From the beginning, Folsom was designed around a single idea. Control the body, and the mind will follow. The birth of American prison brutality. Folsom wasn't just another prison. It became the model. Wardens across the country studied it. Politicians praised it. Newspapers feared it. Why? Because it worked. If your goal was obedience, silence was enforced. Movement was regulated. Punishment was immediate. And violence wasn't a failure of the system. It was part of the system. The cells, designed to erase identity. Early Folsom cells were barely larger than coffins. No privacy. No comfort. No relief. Inmates slept inches from cold stone walls. Light entered only through narrow slits. Air barely moved. These cells were not meant for reflection. They were meant for submission. Names disappeared quickly. Inmates became numbers. And numbers were easier to control. Silence as a weapon. In Folsom's early years, silence was mandatory. Talking was punished. Eye contact was discouraged. Disobedience meant isolation, or worse. The absence of sound became psychological torture. Men lost track of time. Some lost language altogether. The system didn't care. Broken men didn't rebel. Discipline, pain, and public example. Discipline at Folsom was not subtle. Punishments were designed to be seen. Public. Humiliating. Deterrent. Solitary confinement. Bread and water diets. Restraints. The message was clear. This is what happens when you challenge the institution. And few ever forgot it. When the prison became a pressure cooker. Brutality creates obedience, but it also creates pressure. And pressure eventually demands release. By the early 20th century, Folsom was packed beyond capacity. Tension filled the air. Violence wasn't constant. It was inevitable. Riots, resistance, and retaliation. When violence erupted at Folsom, it was swift and crushed without negotiation. Lockdowns followed. Privileges disappeared. Control tightened further. Every riot reinforced the same conclusion. More force. Less freedom. The cycle fed itself. The song that exposed the prison. For decades, Folsom existed in the shadows. Then one song changed everything. A song that turned prison brutality into public conversation. A song that made Americans listen. And once they listened, they could never fully unhear it. The day Folsom couldn't hide anymore. For nearly a century, Folsom operated beyond the public imagination. Stories leaked out, whispers of cruelty, isolation, and absolute control, but nothing that forced America to stop and look. Then, in 1968, the gates opened for a moment. Not for reform, not for inspection, for a microphone, a song that turned concrete into a stage. When Johnny Cash walked into Folsom, he didn't bring sympathy. He brought recognition. Cash didn't pretend the inmates were innocent. He didn't excuse their crimes. He acknowledged their existence. And that alone was radical. The performance was electric. Not because of rebellion, but because of truth. For the first time, Americans heard cheers echoing off prison walls. They heard laughter where silence had ruled. And they realized something unsettling. These men were not monsters. They were controlled. Why the state allowed it? California officials believed the concert was harmless. A morale boost. A publicity moment. What they didn't anticipate was exposure. The album at Folsom Prison didn't just top charts. It cracked open the narrative. Suddenly, Folsom wasn't just a name. It was a symbol. After the applause, the walls remained. When the music stopped, the doors closed. And Folsom went back to being Folsom. The granite didn't soften. The rules didn't relax. The system didn't apologize. Public attention fades quickly. Institutional power does not. Control adapts, IT doesn't disappear. Physical punishment slowly declined. Public scrutiny demanded it. But control didn't weaken. It evolved. Psychological pressure replaced physical pain. Privileges became leverage. Isolation became normalized. Surveillance became constant. Folsom didn't become humane. It became efficient. The rise of gang control inside Folsom. When institutions restrict freedom, power doesn't vanish. It reorganizes. By the late 20th century, inmate gangs filled the vacuum left by direct brutality. They enforced order where the state could not reach instantly. Race, allegiance, survival. Folsom became a chessboard. And every move had consequences. Unwritten rules, real consequences. At Folsom, breaking inmate rules could be as dangerous as breaking prison rules. Who you sat with, where you walked, who you spoke to. Control existed on multiple levels. The institution watched from above. The inmate hierarchy watched from within. Guards, power, and the weight of authority. Correctional officers at Folsom inherited a legacy. They weren't trained to reform. They were trained to maintain order. Most never saw themselves as cruel. They saw themselves as necessary. But necessity can justify almost anything. The thin line between control and cruelty. Guards enforced rules written long before them. Rules born in an era that believed fear was effective. And sometimes the line blurred. Authority hardened. Empathy thinned. Not because guards were evil, but because the institution rewarded detachment. Modern Folsom, what changed, what didn't? Today, Folsom is cleaner, safer, more regulated, but its philosophy still echoes. Isolation is still used. Control is still absolute. Freedom is still rationed. Technology changed the tools, not the intent. Why Folsom still matters. Folsom is no longer the most brutal prison in America, but it is one of the most influential. Its methods shaped policy nationwide. Its failures became blueprints. Its walls taught the state how to control human behavior at scale. When control slipped, incidents that shaped Folsom. Institutions like Folsom survive on an illusion that everything is controlled, that every variable is accounted for, that authority is absolute. But history shows something else. Even the most rigid systems bend. And when they bend inside a place like Folsom, the consequences echo for decades. Incidents that force change. Folsom's record includes moments when order collapsed just long enough to expose its limits. Lockdowns that lasted weeks. Investigations that quietly rewrote policy. Incidents that never made headlines, but reshaped daily life inside. After each breakdown, the response was predictable. More surveillance. More restrictions. Less movement. The institution didn't ask why pressure exploded. It asked how to prevent it next time. Psychological control replaces physical force. By the late 20th century, Overt brutality had become a liability. Public scrutiny grew. Lawsuits followed. California adjusted. But control did not weaken. It refined itself. Physical punishment gave way to psychological pressure. Privileges became currency. Isolation became compliance. Uncertainty became discipline. The science of compliance. Behavioral systems were introduced. Good behavior earned small freedoms. Missteps erased them instantly. The system trained inmates to self-regulate, to fear loss more than pain. It was quieter, cleaner, and, in many ways, more effective. Life sentences and permanent control. For many at Folsom, release is not a possibility. Life sentences mean decades under the same rules, the same walls, the same routines. Time loses structure. Years blur together. The punishment is not the cell. It's never leaving it behind. Aging inside granite walls. As inmates age, the prison adapts, slowly. Medical units expand. Movement decreases. Risk calculations change. But the authority remains unchanged. The sentence is life. And Folsom enforces it precisely as written. Guards between policy and reality. Correctional officers at Folsom occupy an impossible space. They are not lawmakers. They are not judges. But they enforce decisions made far above them. Most do not see themselves as enforcers of brutality. They see themselves as barriers between inmates, between chaos, between the institution and collapse, stress, silence, and routine. Many officers carry the weight home. Hyper-awareness, emotional distance, routine as armor. Folsom trains guards to maintain control. It does not train them to process what control costs. The invisible lines that govern everything. Beyond official rules, Folsom operates on unwritten codes. Where to stand, who to speak to, when to move. These invisible lines maintain order, and crossing them can trigger consequences faster than any official discipline. Institutional power doesn't erase inmate hierarchies. It coexists with them. Time as a tool of the state. At Folsom, time is not neutral. It is weaponized. Schedules dictate life. Waiting becomes routine. Uncertainty becomes constant. The state doesn't need to rush punishment. It lets time do the work. Why Folsom still stands. California has built newer prisons, more advanced facilities, cleaner designs. Yet Folsom remains. Because it represents something foundational. The belief that control must be visible, that authority must be felt, that punishment must be unmistakable. What Folsom teaches America. Folsom is not an outlier. It is a mirror, a reflection of how power operates when fear is policy and control is doctrine. Its methods evolved, its walls endured, and its lessons spread across the country. The future of control, reform without release. California talks about reform more than almost any state in America. New policies, new language, new promises. But institutions like Folsom do not change quickly. They adapt. Control doesn't vanish when laws soften. It rebrands. Reform as management. Modern reform focuses on risk reduction, programs, assessments, behavioral incentives. The goal is stability, not transformation. Fewer incidents, less litigation, predictable outcomes. Reform in practice often means managing damage, not removing the source. Can prisons ever unlearn control? The American prison system was not built for healing. It was built for certainty. Certainty of punishment. Certainty of authority. Certainty that the state always wins. That foundation shapes everything that follows. Even well-intentioned reforms are constrained by a simple truth. You cannot fully humanize a system designed to dominate. The limits of change. Therapy exists. Education exists. Opportunities exist. But only within boundaries the institution controls. Freedom is simulated, not granted. And for those serving life sentences, reform offers structure, not hope. What happens when the walls outlive the ideas? Long after policies change, buildings remain. Stone remembers what language forgets. The walls that enforced silence still stand. The corridors that absorbed fear still echo. Folsom is now part prison, part monument. A living structure carrying outdated philosophies into the present. Memory as warning. Some see Folsom as history. Others see it as proof. Proof that once the state builds a machine of control, dismantling it becomes almost impossible. Institutions are patient. They wait for public attention to drift. What Folsom leaves behind. Folsom was never just a prison. It was a lesson. A lesson in how power maintains itself. How control becomes culture. How punishment shapes policy. It taught America that fear works, at a cost few are willing to calculate. Whether the future brings reform or repetition, one truth remains. Places like Folsom do not disappear when society changes. They remind us of who we were and challenge us to decide who we want to become. The science of obedience, what Folsom taught the state. Folsom did not just incarcerate people. It produced data. Every punishment, every riot, every breakdown. The state watched carefully. Which methods reduced resistance? Which controls prevented rebellion? Which pressures produced obedience without backlash? Over time, Folsom became a laboratory, and the results were exported nationwide. Fear versus predictability. Early prisons relied on fear. Whips, public punishment, spectacle. Folsom proved something more effective. Predictability. When inmates know exactly what will happen if they disobey, they stop testing boundaries. Uncertainty breeds rebellion. Certainty breeds compliance. And Folsom perfected certainty. The architecture of control. Folsom's design was intentional. Straight lines. Long sight lines. No hiding places. The building itself enforced authority. You were always visible, always observed, always aware of power above you. Modern prisons copied this, because architecture can discipline without touching the body. Why old prisons still shape new ones. Even today, architects reference Folsom, not its brutality, but its effectiveness. Control is cheaper than reform. Surveillance is cheaper than trust. And the blueprint still works. The men who never adjusted. Not everyone adapts to control. Some resist until the end. Men who spent decades cycling between isolation and punishment. Men who refuse programs. Men who never accepted authority. They are rarely remembered, but they represent the cost of institutional rigidity. Permanent noncompliance. For these inmates, Folsom offered no path forward. No negotiation, no reset, only repetition. And repetition without hope does not reform. It erodes. When time becomes the sentence. At Folsom, time is not background. It is the punishment. Days identical. Weeks indistinguishable. Years collapsing inward. When nothing changes, the mind turns against itself. This is how control outlasts resistance. Life without narrative. Outside prison, life is chapters. Inside Folsom, there are none. No milestones. No endings. No beginnings. Just duration. The lockdown state. Lockdowns are not failures. They are features. They remind inmates who controls movement. They remind staff who controls escalation. During lockdowns, everything stops, including hope. Control through interruption. Programs paused. Visits canceled. Routine erased. Lockdowns reassert dominance without force. They say, your life continues only with permission. The officers who never left. Some officers spend their entire careers at Folsom, decades inside the same walls. They don't become brutal. They become narrow. Everything outside the institution feels unpredictable. Inside, rules make sense. Control becomes comfort. Institutional identity. For long-term staff, Folsom isn't a workplace. It's an identity. Leaving feels like losing structure. And structure is addictive. Public memory versus reality. Today, Folsom exists in public memory as myth. Johnny Cash, songs, pop culture. But inside, the legacy is different. No applause, no nostalgia, only continuity. Why romanticizing prisons is dangerous. When prisons become symbols, their harm becomes abstract. Folsom isn't a song, it's a system. And systems don't fade because people stop paying attention. California's dilemma. California wants reform, but it also wants order. And those goals often conflict. Folsom remains because it works. Not morally, operationally. The cost of dismantling control. Dismantling a system like Folsom requires money, political risk, public patience. Control is easier, so it persists. The question Folsom leaves us with. Folsom teaches us something uncomfortable. That institutions do not need cruelty to dominate. Only consistency. That control does not announce itself. It normalizes. And that once society accepts domination as necessary, it stops asking whether it's justified. Folsom does not demand judgment. It demands reflection. This was the extended story of Folsom Prison. Not as legend, not as nostalgia, but as a warning. Thanks for watching. What you just saw is more than a story. It's a reality lived by thousands behind bars. If you believe in uncovering the truth, the kind hidden behind concrete walls and silence, then join us. Subscribe to Behind Bars TV and never miss a chapter in the world's most dangerous stories. Until next time, stay aware, stay informed, and stay locked in. Until next time, keep your mind open and your curiosity sharp. Remember, freedom and confinement are sometimes only a wall apart.